5 days left for Congress to avert a government shutdown. So joining me now to talk about this and more is Congresswoman Susan Wild. She's a Democrat from Pennsylvania and a member of the House Foreign Affairs and Ethics Committees. Congresswoman, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Great to see you. Now, right off the bat, what is your reaction to the Speaker's plan, at least that we know of so far, to avert a shutdown?
Well, I started looking at it late last night. I've conferred with a number of my colleagues. It's an unprecedented approach to do this sort of broad laddered program, and I can explain that if you'd like me to. And I'm very, very concerned that it doesn't have much chance of success, and we're just days away from a government shutdown. That's my reaction to it. I am happy to work with the Speaker and anybody else. The last continuing resolution that we got through was done on a bipartisan basis, and I hope this one will be too.
And look, one of the things that we know so far is that neither of the proposed bills, so to speak, include additional funding for Israel or Ukraine. And we knew at least funding for Ukraine was an issue in late September when we were barreling toward a potential shutdown then. And even on the Republican side, Mike McCall out of Texas said this morning, I don't think we can play political games with our support to allies, because if they fail, we fail. And I'm curious, do you share that concern at all, especially that it wasn't included in these early versions of what's being proposed?
I'm very concerned about that, and I'll tell you why. We have seen over the last few months that Congress is not exactly operating at its best, and things have been delayed, inefficient, not getting done. And I'm very concerned that if we pass this continuing resolution and it does not attach supplemental funding for Israel, humanitarian aid, and Ukraine, we'll never get it done. To add to that, the fact that we are heading into the holidays, and Congress is notorious for not being happy about sticking around on Thanksgiving Day, and you can imagine. So we really need to get this done all at once. I would completely agree with Chairman McCall. He's the chairman of my Foreign Affairs Committee. I have the utmost respect for him, and I have to tell you, I think he's absolutely right. We cannot be playing politics at this point.
And for those watching and we're wondering about the laddered approach, essentially, the first bill would extend funding until January. That would include things from military construction, veteran affairs, transportation. The rest of the government, the second part of the bill would extend funding until February, which would include the rest of the government here. Are you Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just add to that, Omar? Yeah. That means with any kind of continuing resolution, that means we're going to have to vote all over again in January and February on this kind. That's what's wrong with these
in a piecemeal
COs.
kind of way.
It's piecemeal, and it just means we're postponing the agony.
And along those lines, I mean, I think with this being Speaker Mike Johnson's first real test, many were curious if he would run into some of the same dynamics that Kevin McCarthy did. Are you optimistic that this new Speaker Johnson will find a way to get a plan that will pass either without leaning on Democratic support, or do you think he is going to need Democratic support to get something to pass here?
I think he's going to need Democratic support, because the one thing we know almost to a certainty is that the GOP side of the aisle contains a number of people who are extremists and who have shown absolutely no indication that they want to get things done and they want to work with others. Remember, Kevin McCarthy got ousted because he came up with a continuing resolution that most Democrats, if not all of us, voted for. That was very unsatisfactory to the extremist caucus. And I'm very concerned that Speaker Johnson, who I don't know at all yet, is going to run into the same problem. So I really think that the safest approach is to do the approach where you are working with the Democrats to get something passed, so that the I guess it's about a dozen extremists in the GOP conference, that their votes don't matter.
Now, I want to turn to, obviously, it's an issue that is caught up in the budget fight, but to the Israel-Hamas war. On Friday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he denounced and criticized, really, the civilian death toll in Gaza, saying far too many Palestinians have been killed. President Biden has even expressed some frustration with how long it's taken Israel to implement a large-scale humanitarian pause. And while Israel's agreed to some 4-hour pauses in parts of northern Gaza, do you believe Israel needs to go further to protect civilians than what they've done so far?
I do. The loss of life is devastating, and I will go back to October 7th and I don't ever want anybody to forget how this war started and the loss of Israeli lives on that day, but the continuing loss of life. And by the way, that includes some IDF soldiers and other Israelis as well, and potentially these hostages. I'm very, very concerned about the fate of the hostages. But we cannot be watching just thousands of innocent lives being lost without using the leverage that the United States government has with Israel to really ask them to adopt a different approach. I'm not a military expert, but there are military experts that I have spoken with who have told me that this can be done in a much more targeted fashion, less air power, more on the ground power. I understand the risks. I understand the problems of having Hamas in tunnels. It's a devastating situation. And yes, Hamas caused this problem, no question about it. But there are Palestinians, people of Gaza, who have no fault in this, who are losing their lives every day. And we've got to do something to reduce the ongoing loss of life. We're not going to be able to bring those lives back, sadly. And in addition to that, for the people who have survived, thankfully, we've got to make sure that the humanitarian aid is getting to them. And that's, a significant part of the supplemental that needs to be passed by Congress. But these pauses did not come quickly enough and have not lasted long enough. I was part of a letter more than a week ago asking for these pauses to be extended and to make them really meaningful. And I'm glad that the Biden administration is leaning on the government of Israel to make that happen.
Yeah.
At the same time, I understand just how hard it is. And I've talked to a number of people who know what they're talking about, who say that it's very, very difficult now that we have the Israeli Defense Forces on the ground in Gaza.
Well, and they've painted a picture, I should say, that they've been trying to do their best to avoid civilian casualties. But what they say, politics or even policy-wise, I should say, sometimes trying to match that up with what's on the ground has been very difficult in the reality of the moment. Congressman, I got to leave it there. Well, we've got plenty to talk about on this topic. We'll have you back. But Congressman Susan Wild, thank you so much. We'll be right back.
Thank you.